Hey, before we get started here, I just want to let you know that as a little thanks for listening, my company's offering listeners to this podcast some free software. So if you want to learn more about that, we have some more details at the end after the interview. Alternatively, track me down on LinkedIn and I'll have a pinned post at the top of my profile. Just search for Joe Meadows and we'll take it from there. All right, let's get started. Hi there, this is Joe Meadows and welcome to Safety Leaders Now, the show where we cut through the noise and identify the strategies and tactics that today's top safety leaders use to keep their teams safe. On this week's episode, we have Aimee Arsenault. Aimee is a consultant, so she's helping a bunch of companies out with their kind of health and safety stuff. And I was a little bit interested to see how the conversation would go, as we do try to focus on people who are running health and safety within organizations. But once we got started, we had an awesome conversation. I think we covered a ton of things. You know, Aimee's really thoughtful about a lot of these issues. And I think we hit on a lot of things that could be really valuable for a lot of people. We talked about her experience as an auditor, and I put her in the hot seat a little bit to talk about auditors' responsibilities as it relates to kind of defining our objectives in health and safety, because as we know, external auditors can have a big influence on that. But anyway, really valuable conversation. I think there's a ton of actionable stuff in here that people are really going to enjoy. So with that, let's get started with the episode. Aimee, thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started here, can you just quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Aimee Arsenault. I am the founder of Transmit Safety, a consulting firm based out of Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Acronyms behind my name, but what you really need to know is that I really enjoy talking about workplace health and safety, which is probably why I'm on this podcast. That's my introduction. I like it short and sweet. If you want to learn more, click on the link that they'll probably be in the show notes. But other than that, that's what you need to know about me. I like talking about workplace health and safety.
Okay. Now, can you give us just a quick, or for those of you listening, this is my first time ever talking to Aimee. So we are both, we're learning on the fly here. Can you give us a quick overview of kind of your professional background and what brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, it's one of those, I landed here because I didn't know what else to do in that moment. I had a plan to get an after degree in education, and after I took a year away from school and lived in Germany for a year, I kind of came back and went, yeah, that's not for me. So I went to work with a company that I did as I went through university, kind of said, you know, I'm looking for a job, what's available? They said, you're here, the health and safety administrator position is available. That's me, excellent. So that's kind of how I landed in health and safety. It was kind of organically an opportunity opened up, which is thinking back on all of my other positions. So health and safety administrator, regional health and safety administrator, corporate health and safety administrator, project safety administrator, junior coordinator, like you name it. And I kind of went through the levels of professionalism, and it all kind of happened organically through my network. So I let my network know, hey, I'm looking for my next opportunity, and they kind of arrived. So when I decided to become my own business owner, like the entrepreneur aspect of consultant, I let my network know and said, hey, this is where I am in my professional development career, and I want to focus on creating health and safety management systems. I want to help build programs and help small to medium business owners realize that workplace health and safety shouldn't be complicated, and that should be holistically integrated within their organization. So that's kind of my approach when it comes to health and safety. And industry-wise, where did I land? So I worked in heavy civil infrastructure, Fort McMurray, so the oil sands up in that area, a gas plant expansion, road construction, gold mine expansion, did a quick stint into commercial HVAC. Spent quite a few years in telecommunications, and now here I am in my consulting business, where I don't really specialize in any type of particular industry. I focus more on that small to medium company who's trying to figure out health and safety, might need that subject matter expert to come in and give them some guidance, but not necessarily, take over their program. I'm not the person that comes in and like does your inspections and does your orientation. That should be somebody in your organization, and I'm there to kind of help you, coach you, guide you to that implementation.
What does help, coach, guide, like what does that look like in a practical sense?
So it could be one-on-one coaching. It could be creating a strategic plan and implementing a program. It could be creating a communication strategy. If you're rolling out a new initiative, how do you build that within, how do you get the buy-in from all the stakeholders? It could be coming in and doing an audit on your program, and then providing you a corrective action plan or working with you to develop an action plan that makes sense for your business. A lot of what I see with small to medium business owners, when I dive into their program, it's like it's copy and pasted from their major clients. And then they're saying, this isn't working for me. The health and safety is more complicated than what it needs to be. It's like, oh, but you copy and pasted your program from a multi-million-dollar organization that has 50 different levels on their org chart. Of course it's not working for you. You're a company of 20. Let's make this realistic for you so that you can be achievable in whatever your goals can be. And that's the other aspect of the conversation that I like to have with either the health and safety practitioner or more the management side of things is, how can a health and safety strategy help you in your organizational goals? So do you want to increase profitability? Do you want to increase market share? Do you want to reduce employee turnover? Let's create health and safety strategies that will help, that kind of support your overall business strategy. Those are the conversations that I like to have with my clients.
Well, you'd probably be hard pressed to find organizations who don't aim to increase profitability and market share. But that being said, I think that makes a ton of sense. So I want to dig into this a little bit more, but with SMBs in particular, like small and medium businesses, can you just help me understand, you alluded to companies of 20 people, but what's that kind of sweet spot for you right now? Could you kind of give me an example of what that might look like?
For me, I like that sweet spot between 50 to 150 employees. That is kind of at the point where the company realizes that they need a full-time health and safety practitioner on staff to help them internally within their program, but not at the size where they necessarily have like a CRSP or a CHSE, or they can hire an industrial hygienist and they can hire a health safety nurse practitioner. So at a smaller scale, where they might have somebody who is kind of at the first entry level steps within their career, and that person that is in-house needs a coach, needs a mentor, somebody to spitball and say, this is the situation that we're in. What do we do? What have you done before? How do we approach this? The client just asked us to do this. What's the tactic? So being kind of that on the call resource for them. In terms of the size, I think that the smaller companies where it's less than 10 or less than 20, it's not a health and safety practitioner. It's somebody who's got tapped on the shoulder and said, you're now also responsible for health and safety, but it's not your full-time job. It's not your career. It's not your passion. It's just another part of your job duties. And having conversations with those companies are a little bit different than having conversations that have full-time embedded health and safety practitioners versus health and safety teams that are fully integrated and having somebody even in the health and safety realm sitting at that C-suite table. Those
Gotcha.
are different conversations, different approaches when it comes to workplace health and safety.
Okay, so I think I really love what you said earlier around looking at some of those, and it's something I've seen probably more on the company side of things, but those companies who either work in oil and gas, so they're all, trying to get contracts with super majors, so they put in policies and procedures that make absolutely no sense for small companies. I think that idea of kind of having people step back and reevaluate that is really interesting, and I want to come back to that. But maybe before we do that, I want to take a bit of a step back here and not just kind of get into the nitty gritty right off the bat. So I'm curious to know, actually, just as an absolute sidebar,
Okay, I'm ready.
Are you originally from Alberta?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just so I grew up on the east coast of Canada, and Arsenault is like the most common name in the
I
world.
get
So I
asked
was just
that
curious.
all the
Yeah,
time.
I
I get asked that so often. So what I say is like my family has been in Western Canada for years and years and years, and I don't ever recall visiting any arsenals in the East Coast or
okay.
connecting to them. Yeah.
All right. Well, now there's
Sorry.
now you can refer people to a recording to answer that question.
Yeah,
Um,
I
just
I would say I get asked. So I instruct and I do public speaking, and pretty much at least once a week, if I'm in the public sphere, somebody says, "Are you related to the Arsenals in the East Coast?" I'm like, I don't know, maybe like genetically, probably, but with family tree wise, I don't know.
fair enough. Okay. Well, I don't want to bore anybody with the vagaries of Canadian genealogy. So let's talk a little bit more about safety. So you've made this transition. It's not something I don't think it's incredibly novel. I think you're seeing an increase in safety professionals, and I think professionals across the board moving more towards this kind of gig model. That makes a ton of sense. But I think one of the things that I'm always curious about is, or if I'm a person trying to hire a consultant or whatever, someone like yourself,
Mhm.
what I want to understand is, what do you think is novel about your approach that would, or yeah, what's specific to you that's going to make me hire you over somebody else?
Well, summed up, I think it's just my approach, my personality, and whether or not you jive with me as an individual. Because I have acronyms behind my name. A lot of consultants have acronyms behind their names. I have training in health and safety. Consultants have training in health and safety. If you look at our websites, we probably offer very similar services: program development, auditing, coaching. So when you're hiring a consultant, I think it is very valuable for a business owner or for a fellow health and safety practitioner who's internal within the company wanting to hire somebody to help them get a project going, is to at least interview 3 to 5 consultants, hear what they have to say about approach, get their kind of their vibe, their communication style, what is their niche kind of approach. I love to focus on workflows. So I'm a workflow process. Let's figure out how to streamline this, simplify this. Let's make less work for everybody involved. That's kind of my approach. And I'm even one of my company values is like authentically transparent. So most of my language is workplace appropriate, but if I call something, I'm going to say it as it is. I'm a no filter. This isn't working for you. This is, beep, not appropriate for your program. Let's cut this. Let's go this. I'm just a straight shooter. And I generally don't like the politicking of, the consultant world. If you want somebody who's going to tell you like it is, then that's me. That's kind of my approach, because at the end of the day, if you're building your program to a particular industry standard, ACSA, Energy Safety Canada, one of the certifying partners, the consultant is has a boundary of what that program needs to work for, because you're writing it to meet a particular audit standard, or you're writing it to get to a particular client site. So what can go into your program is not necessarily going to be, fluffy and feel good. It's like, okay, what do you want in your program? Let's put it in there. Let's take all of the fluff out, because you don't need it. Employees don't read your health and safety program. They don't, right? Let's be honest, a spade. Like, they read it because they need to read it, or because you're forcing them to sign it. But
Yeah, they don't read it; they sign it. That's different.
Yeah, like flip. Yeah, I've read it, but so how to create your documentation that makes sense to the workers, to all of the different stakeholders that need to get it. That's me. Streamline, simplify. That's my approach.
Okay, you're inspiring I'm trying to think of a way to word this question, because I think that all makes sense, right? I think there's a increased like anti-BS movement in safety, kind of generally, around people understanding that, hey, at a certain point, this bloat is going to catch up to us, and we're losing our ability to be effective as professionals and to be taken seriously within an organization or if we continue to just pile things on top of people. So
sometimes when you're reading, bids for clients, and you're reading this and it's like, clearly this is a make work project for that company's health and safety professional, because this is just over redundancy. So it depends on your exposure too, what industry you're working in, what does that look like? But sometimes it's like we make work for ourselves. And I'm talking as a health and safety practitioner. I think sometimes we make work for ourselves to try to elevate our importance within the organization, but it doesn't actually bring value.
Yeah, and I think that there's it's part of the reason we're doing this show is honestly selfishly, for me to try and deconstruct the different approaches that people are taking, because I think that it's not simply about reducing what we do, but it's also about doing things that actually matter and being able to measure and demonstrate that they matter, because that's the standard to which every other department in the company is held. And safety has for too long been able to say safety first and use this as sort of a carte blanche to do things that would never get approved if they were rationalized in the same way in operations, for example. So with that, I want to kind of, I'm going completely off notes at this point. You mentioned that what you often do is you come in and you say, well, what's the audit standard that you're working towards? And let's write a program that hits those boxes with the fewest amount or with the smallest amount of complexity. Is that a fair analysis of what you said?
Yeah, I think so, right? So what audit standard are you wanting to meet? Let's build your program to meet that audit standard and put in the frequencies and the metrics that make sense to you and your business based on your scope and your risk levels.
Okay, so I'm going to pose a question here.
Okay.
Do you think that part of do you think those audit standards are what we should be the only thing that we're focused on?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No, absolutely not. But there's that qualifying question. If you are auditing your program to a particular standard, you better be meeting those benchmarks, because otherwise you're going to fail the audit and you're not going to get whatever work scope that you need, or clients that need you to have core or have an ISO or whatever standard you're adhering to. Your program better at least meet those benchmarks. Is that the only benchmark? Absolutely not.
Do you think that people can sometimes get a little, can lose their way a little bit when you use auditors as your measure of success?
So I'm a certified auditor.
Sure.
And I audit programs and I provide feedback. And the audit is summed up. Some audits are asking, are they doing the things that they say that they're supposed to be doing? Yes or no. But they miss that, and how well are they doing it, right? There's that quality versus quantity question that doesn't necessarily allow us to go deep diving in to say, okay, yes, they're doing an orientation. Yes, they've met these, 5, 10, 15 requirements. But, so the check boxes are there, but how well is their onboarding process? What is the actual kind of feedback that they're getting from the people who are going through the onboarding process? What is that next level of approach? What are you doing other than the audit process? What else are you doing to measure the success of your program? And part of that is linking it to those strategic developments within the organization. So your program should be supporting the overall success of the business. Businesses are in business to be in business. We need to realize that and have programs that support that. So I don't know if I answered your question in a roundabout way or if I kind of sideways swiped it or not, but if you're summing up, if you're writing your program, if you are required to do an audit, build your program to meet that audit requirement, and then add in the other elements after that, right? So what's your internal responsibility system? What is your expectation for roles? How do you kind of put that into the application, into the real world? Because you can have a fantastic policy, you can have a fantastic program for inspections and hazard, you can have fantastic formal hazard assessments, but in the field, they flop. So how do you take paper to practicality?
So for anyone who's just listening to this and not watching it on YouTube or whatever, I'm kind of dancing around now because I've landed on some stuff. Partially, I want to put you in the hot seat as an auditor. But before we get into that, I'm curious. Okay, so as you said, and I think it makes total sense, it logically follows one of the primary ways that your success is going to be measured as kind of a health and safety or a compliance professional is, are you meeting those standards? So we need to understand them. My background in the offshore space, we got audited constantly, and I always felt like that was one of my sweet spots. It was being prepared to just have that dialogue with an auditor directly. But that being said, as you just said, businesses are in business to make money, to extract wealth in whatever way that they can. And so I think that it's easy to say we need to view our audits or these standards as kind of the baseline, and then look at, again, how well are we doing things? How do we measure responsibility? But do you have any advice for people who might say, Aimee, that sounds awesome, but when my business comes to me and says, what's the bare minimum you can do? And the only way they can measure that is the audit. How do you advance the conversation beyond that?
Well, the ideal kind of process of health and safety is continuous improvement. So ideally, you're going to get to a point where, you're at the top of the audit score. And if that's the only benchmark that you're using, then you are running into the situation of potentially, well, the management isn't going to buy in anymore, or you're not going to get any more budget because you're already at a 95 or you're already at a 92 within the audit. And for them, that's good enough. So having different conversations with different people are so important, because it's not, I hate saying this, but it's ask not what your health and safety program, you can do for your health and safety program, ask what your health and safety program can do for you, right? It's very generic, but you should go to each one of your business departments and say, what are you working on? How can I support that? And kind of internally ask, okay, well, how can I support that goal? Utilizing the tools that I have within my health and safety program. What functionality of their business are they trying to grow and improve upon? And so maybe I'm directly not being able to, have a success on a platter for the organization, but I'm a mechanism for improvement for those other departments. Does that answer the question?
I think it does. I think one of the things, or do you think that part of it is also about, or I talk a lot about measurement. And I think that it's such a loaded topic because of the nuances of incentives and measurement, or the nuanced incentives that measurements create in a health and safety organization. But I think if I play devil's advocate, even with the example that you just gave, if I'm, director of health and safety at company X, and I go over to the ops department and say, what are you doing and how can I help you? Or if I do that too much, let's say, they might start saying do you have nothing to do over there? And then you get fired. That might be a problem. So sometimes it's also about saying, how do we, or, do you think that part of this could be about how we measuring that success and making it clear that that's driving value for the business?
Yeah, and when you're sitting in in the ops meetings, if you're lucky enough to be invited to the table, you're listening to what their problems are. High employee turnover, employees coming in without the proper gear, without the education, without the training. And then meanwhile, you're thinking, okay, on the job training, on the job mentorship, my onboarding process, okay, how can I support these problems that they're having? Equipment failures, downtime, not being able to be on time for a project because, tools and equipment weren't calibrated appropriately. And it's okay, well, health and safety people sometimes are involved in the preventative maintenance program. How can my program help that, decreasing the amount of downtime and helping make sure that tools and equipment are prepped and ready to go? And it's about, okay, well, here's my elements that I have available to me. And as I'm listening to these conversations, I'm now going to go and talk to general foreman and say, in your last project, you brought up multiple times that X equipment just wasn't working for you. What do we need to do in terms of inspections, preventative maintenance? How do we need to make sure that, what type of training does the operator actually need? Let's develop these skill sets prior to the next job. And so that's kind of the approach I would take, not necessarily like, how can I help you today? But it's like, okay, so I've noticed that you've mentioned quite a few times that this is an issue that you're working on. These are the ways that I can help you work on this program. And some of it might not be tangible. You might not be able to measure it in a meaningful way, other than maybe that operational goal, or that supervisor saying, yeah, we actually had a reduction of downtime, or we had our number of production hours increased because of our previous inspections, or whatever that element is. Safety, this is a very, very generalized statement. I think we've gotten into a trap as health and safety professionals, counting widgets simply to count widgets. And so whenever somebody says, oh, we should be counting FLHA cards or site-specific hazard assessment cards, like I cringe internally, because when I was told that by a client, I'm like, where's the value in that? Why am I counting this? Why am I measuring this? What is the value of this activity? Which is a question that I really like to bring forward into multiple in conversations. It's like, what's the value of this activity to the health and safety program, to the company, to that individual worker? And does it actually do anything other than give you a stat on a spreadsheet that you look at once a month and high five around the table if it's in green, because the spreadsheet triggers it to be in green or whatever?
I don't know. Okay, I agree with all of this. I think but I have questions. I'm feeling very kind of cheeky in this conversation. So hopefully, if I step out of line, tell me I'm here. But I want to. Do you think that we shouldn't be counting as much?
I think that we should be thinking about what we're counting and why we're counting it. So it's not necessarily the quantity of the count, it's the quality of the thought process after the count occurs. Because if you want to count 10,000 widgets and there's a value behind knowing about those 10,000 widgets, then count them. If you're not making, how would I phrase this? If there's no decision that is being made from that count, why are you counting it? If there's no actionable behavior or actionable change that is being influenced by that count, why are you counting it? Other than the audit checkbox, right? Which is that baseline. Are you doing the basic things that you say that you're going to do? But after that, what's the next step to that widget count?
I think that's an interesting way to phrase it, because I think that sometimes people they're incentivized for action, or again, you're creating a monthly report and you just want to create some donut graph or show some line going up and to the right. And I almost feel as though this is a whole other conversation that we won't get into right now. But one of the things or one of my fundamental beliefs and what ultimately drew me into this world is that there's such an opportunity for more nuance in this conversation. And it's like we're counting with like we're scratching numbers into the wall, where every other industry is developing this huge amount of nuance in their understanding with data. And we're like, well, we counted our observations and now we have a graph on our dashboard. So now we're digital. And it's like the most intellectually dishonest way of analyzing what's going on, because like, is that a number we should know? Certainly, along with you should have 400 different stats that you generate insights from. You don't get an insight from our observations are going up, so our safety culture is good. Like that's
10 out of 15 people have valid fall protection training.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a quick kind of statement. It's like compliance isn't a flex.
Yeah.
Right. And so you shouldn't be flexing and be like, I'm doing the bare minimum. I'm meeting legislation requirements. Good for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's a baseline, not a finish line. Like it's just where it starts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is part of where we need to grow in terms of health and safety practitioners, is realizing that our focus has been very, in my opinion, has been very narrowed in our approach to, hazard assessments, hazard recognition, anticipation, but not understanding that there is the wild world of the holistic approach, like the integration of all of the different elements and understanding. So if you can't sit at the, in a finance meeting, if you can't sit in a supply chain and understand the supply chain that your organization is going through, if you're not understanding the HR nuances of the hiring practices, and that's the next level of the conversation that I think we need to start to have.
Okay, we'll put a pin in this. Maybe we'll come back to it, but I just know I can go on a rabbit hole, and I don't want people to have to listen to me talk about this anymore. Okay, so you said you are a certified auditor. This is, introducing a new segment, auditor in the hot seat. So I'm curious to understand, as you said before, one of the things that that the conversation can stop in some circumstances when people say we hit the audit results, but they never ask, what do we do next? Do you think that we need to change the way that we audit so that we're giving people more? So we're adding a little bit more to that conversation internally? Open question.
The certifying partner that I do external audits for requires an action plan at the end of the audit. So developing the action plan to close the gaps that were identified in that audit. And the next audit that comes through says, did they complete the action plan from the last audit? And when you're looking at those action plan audits, it's really just to close the gap on the audit. How can we get the score? Because that's what management, for the most part, again, very generalized, that's what management wants. They want to get the pass mark, they want to get a certain amount of score, and how do we do that with the least amount of effort and or budgetary expenses? So the audit is a stepping stone, it's a foundation to have other conversations. That's my approach. So even in my closeout meetings, in my pre-audit meetings that I have with my clients, I say, okay, well, I'm going to do the audit for you. Here's the audit. Let's have a conversation about like the audit tool, the audit questions. Let's go through that process. But what are you trying to achieve within your organization? What are you struggling with right now in terms of your health and safety program? Because you might score, a full marks on a section, but if you tell me that your competency assessment program is, can I swear on this show? I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
If you tell me that your competency assessment is full of crap and it's not working, and during the interviews the employees are saying that it's bullshit and it's not working, but you score 10 out of 10 on that question or on that point, I'm going to bring it up in the closeout meeting and say, like, listen, you got all the points, but to take it to the next level, here are some additional recommendations. And that's outside of the audit report, that's outside of the audit kind of the document itself. It's just something that I, as an auditor, I'm like, I'm going to give you this feedback because, you got 100% or you got 10 out of 10 out of this question, but take it to the next level. Because to me, the audit is bare minimum compliance, and compliance isn't a flex.
100%. Well, so this raises something, and I don't even know if I have an opinion on it. Because I think, again, I've done, I don't know how many audits where I've been, the scared person in the coveralls with the clipboard, taking the auditor around, trying to make sure that everything's okay. And I think one of the things that I've found, both in, when I was a person in the field and now working with safety leadership teams, is, again, I don't know how much we can make out auditors responsible for this. But how many organizations go and they take your, asterisks, these aren't that important, but here's some opportunities for improvement. And that's like, the auditor said it, we better get this done before they come back. And I've seen so many cases where that's undermined their own philosophy of what their safety program is. And then you end up with those huge, bloated, crazy systems where it's just like the offhanded comments of each annual auditor have created this whole monster. So I'm just curious, like, do you have any thoughts on that? Is there anything that you would, how do we keep that from happening so that we can absorb feedback from an external party without making it haul us off the rails?
Well, a few things. One, interview your auditors before you decide what auditor that you want to bring into your team. What is their approach? Ask for references. Um, Word of mouth, like as a business owner, right? Word of mouth is a huge impact for how I bring in business. So if somebody has worked with that auditor before and said, yeah, they're great, these are the perspectives, regardless of what they have, even after I pass the audit report back to you in my closeout meeting, I'm like, these are just my notes on what I found based on the audit tool, based on what we had discussed in terms of area of improvement. You can read the audit and then decide on, yeah, Aimee was completely, not aligned with where we want to go, or we're willing, we are willing to say we never want those 5 points because we don't want to do that. And that's where it comes to really asking yourselves internally as you're going through those audit reports, does this make sense for us in our unique business? And decide as a management team group, hopefully with that health and safety practitioner at the table, to say, does this make sense for us? How do we want to internalize this? How do we want to add in all of the ingredients that the auditor put onto the table, right? Do this, and if you want these points, you got to add these 2 words into your policy. If you want, these 5 points, you need to, bring up your corrective action 4 times a year to help your employees remember that you actually talked about it, like whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And then you need to take a look and say, okay, well, we're going to take a little of this, a little of that, none of that, because it just doesn't make sense, or, that auditor completely missed the mark, or, like we're doing it, but we just didn't document it. So now we're simply going to, process it a little bit differently, fix the system on how we're tracking it. But so I don't know if I answered the question. I'm going to go all the way back. Just because an auditor says that you have to do something doesn't mean that you have to do it. And it's up to you within your company to ask the question, does this bring value to us? Or is this just another make work project?
I think that that's an awesome answer. And I think that for anecdotally, a listener recently reached out to me and explained that they've been listening to these podcast episodes like as a team and doing kind of case studies on these conversations. And Larry, if you're listening, love that message. But moving on, I think that if I'm a safety team sitting and listening to this conversation, to me, the thing to learn from what you've just shared is almost just, you need to have that meeting, because I think too many people will say it's too much work to have the meeting, just do the things they said. And there's a failure to recognize that everything's going to get away from you because you're kind of putting someone else at the reins without realizing it. And again, you can undermine your strategy a little bit in those circumstances.
Well, then you're just building your program to meet the audit tool requirements, and going way back to the initial start of this conversation is that it should be a foundation, the starting point, the platform that you jump and leap it to take it to the next level. And if you're just saying, like, if you get the audit report and then your health and safety practitioner goes into the corner in their little back office and mushrooms their action plan, and they're assigned every single action item and they're responsible for rolling it out, and there's no actual responsibility, accountability, there's no RACI chart associated with that action plan.
Yeah.
Like, I think you're missing the point, right? Like, to me, it's like, no, it's a group thing. Continuous improvement needs buy-in by multiple layers within the organization. That health and safety person, my approach to health and safety is that they coach, they lead, they guide, they advise, right? The doers should be the people doing the work. That's where that holistic approach comes into place.
Yeah, and I think that part of it, for my completely anecdotal and unscientific analysis, is that part of the reason that these things happen is we're taught, and I think experience will teach you around being deferential to auditors within the bounds of the audit requirements. And I think sometimes people, fail to keep that perspective that this auditor sees a lot of systems, and it's understanding that you want to be deferential when we're talking about the things, this is the standard you need to meet and you didn't meet it. But then when you're getting those additional points, those are additional points. And I think sometimes people are just so used to appeasing an auditor that they never take that step back and say, like, this is not, received, but we're not going to do this one. And I would just challenge, I think it's so consistent with the personality of many safety professionals. Being risk adverse is almost a qualification for the job. So there's not a lot of people who are super confident in saying, like, all due respect, not a chance, we're going to do that. And it's really interesting to see.
We're not ready for that. Not this year. We're going to start with this over here. We're going to put, a lot of our focus into doing this element. And this one, yeah, we know we need to work on, but we're not ready for it.
Yeah.
So, another part of getting the audit report, it's like, oh my goodness, there's 10 sections and we need to do 10 things all at once. And then all of a sudden your workers are overwhelmed and they're going, well, what did our program look like before? And so part of that is, the communication strategy and the strategic implementation of which one are we going to roll out now and how are we going to project manage the development and the implementation of widget A or widget B.
Yeah, no, I again, maybe just to, I shouldn't maybe get into this as a host, but to share an anecdote on our side. I mean, in my day job where we're doing safety software implementations, the amount of times where we'll be dealing with a new partner and they say, like, well, we need to do this because it's a regulation. You'd be like, is it really? Can you show it to me? And you realize that there's all these things that have become kind of lore that they were interpreted as a regulation because they probably came from an auditor, but it was an auditor just giving off the cuff feedback. And it's become kind of a challenge. I think we've gotten a lot better at it, but having those conversations with people who would like bet their house that this is a rule. And
show me your legal risk registry within your organization and then bring up exactly what part of the legislation that applies to. And absolutely, we can have a conversation about that. But there are a lot of, I think this is part of the taking the step back and realizing that health and safety practitioners come from different experiences, different industries, different educational backgrounds, different professional development. And so when you're having a conversation with another practitioner, sometimes I have to remember, okay, well, where are they coming from? What is their professional background? And are we talking about the same types of apples? Because we can be talking about apples, but I'm over here with a Granny Smith and you're over there with a ambrosia, or maybe I'm here in a crab apple, like whatever it is. Sometimes when you're having conversations, even in that same professional world, it's different because of the different stepping stones or industries. Industries is huge. The different industries that somebody comes from and where they've worked in can play a big impact on that's legislation. That's a requirement. Okay, well, from where? Pull it out. Let's have a conversation about it.
Yeah, for some, as you said, I think we're all coming from different contexts here. And I think that so much of this is also, anyway, I'm trying to avoid getting on my soapbox or perhaps
just make sure that you install the guardrails.
Exactly.
And if not, you hook up properly, right?
No, I think that one of the things that's been really inspiring to me, just as a process, you mentioned that you're kind of a process person, is one of the trends that I've noticed is the quick, what we would call solutioning, which is like a software term that we've talked about. And that in the industrial world, we tend to be too quick to solution a problem instead of to clearly identify what the problem is. And it leads to this place where people's intuitive judgments become the result. And you can get to a point, and I think you were just kind of alluding this, that we're not even trying to solve the same problem. And that's where some people can sometimes get, misaligned and disconnected on things. And that's been a process. When we had a product designer on our team who was enthusiastic about these processes. And we use a thing called design thinking when we're trying to work through these things with people. And it's very interesting to sit down and have people like, can you articulate the problem you're trying to solve and not just tell me what you want me to do about it? Wild. And I wonder in the cases of auditors, I'm just here pontificating at this point, maybe by not saying what people should do, but identifying what's not working and challenging them to solve it might end up leaving them more in the driver's seat. I don't know.
And that's the question that you ask, right?
Yeah.
What's working for you in your program? What do you think isn't working for you? Because again, regardless of the scores, if you get 100% in your inspection section, but as you're talking to the frontline supervisors, it's like, I have to do way too many inspections. The corrective actions are never getting closed out appropriately. You know, we see it, we fix it, we move on, but we see it, we fix it, we move on 20 times. So you're not fixing the cause, right? You're not identifying what that contributing factor is. You're not taking the step back, because the extension cord is there every week, and you're moving the extension cord every week, but you're never actually taking the step back and going, okay, well, do we need to redesign the workspace to take that hazard? And this is just a very generic, example, but like, how many times do you have to identify the extension cord and move the extension cord before you start thinking about, well, where's the power problem?
Do you think, to build on this, do you think we need to be holding our regulators to higher account? Like, do you think it's a problem that they don't ask us, what's your observation closeout time? Because if we're looking to them as the standards of what excellence is, but we're only getting this surface level understanding of our business, and it's like, you have a corrective action plan, you just don't do any of them. Are they not measuring the right things? Have they not evolved for where things are today?
Yeah, let me check my insurance before I answer that question.
You can speak generally. I just mean, is that a conversation that would be worth having?
But no, like, so from a certifying partner kind of auditor perspective, where in the Alberta world, you get the certificate of recognition, right? To me, that's meeting the OHS requirements of what your program needs to be. And again, that's not a flex.
Yep.
So should we be holding the regulators to a higher standard? I think that's where the industry standard comes into place. And the regulators do, and again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not offering legal advice here in any way, shape, or form, but kind of in that kind of conversation about, well, what are other people in your industry doing? I think the regulators do capture that higher standard by comparing you to other companies within your industry. Where I think the variation is too wide is the various industry standards that exist. Because I have clients in oil and gas, I have clients in construction, telecommunications, I have clients in agriculture. Like the variation and the interpretation of the next step up from bare minimum legislation compliance, that's where there's a lot of gray and potentially confusion as to, well, this is the way that we do things. If you have workers who never jump from industry to industry or province to province, then you probably don't notice it. If you're a health and safety practitioner who has dabbled in multiple industries and dipped your foot into one and went, "Ooh, not for me," like I did, then you might be a little bit more aware of those conversations. That it's, so I don't know, like, should we be holding the regulators to a higher standard? I think, and this is, again, I don't even know how to answer this in a way that it's going to be, I think that they're doing a good job with the resources that are allocated to them by the powers invested by the legislation.
Okay, fair enough.
Again, I'm not a lawyer.
That's a political response. Or do you think that they should be? I think part of it though is that maybe people are looking at that certification of like baseline competence as a certification of excellence. So maybe it's not about changing that, but it's adding, how do you get your advanced diploma? Because I think that's where, do I realistically think this is going to happen? No. But at the same, I think
I would argue that, and let me jump into that, because I don't know, 15 years ago, core, and I say this, from multiple different industries that I was in, core was the benchmark standard. and you were, graciously invited and the doors opened up into our clients during the bidding phase if you had a core certificate.
Yeah.
And now a core certificate is your ticket to be invited to the bid. And so I think that it is starting to have an evolution. And so now core used to be the excellence standard, but the industry standard is moving forward to say, okay, now everybody is on the same bench, the same level. Now we're looking to see who's leveling up from that. How they're doing that, I think, is still in progress, still in conversation.
I think that's an amazing business opportunity for somebody. Just saying, like to have something that says, not do you have a workplace observation program, but what's your average time to closure on a workplace observation? Or, like how do we actually judge the effectiveness of these systems and not their mere presence, which is, I think, largely what we do today. Mm-hmm. I bet if somebody was to put some money behind that and create some cool certificate that really meant something, that could be a cash cow.
Yeah, well, and it's about the quality, yep. Right? And that's the next level that the company should potentially be thinking about doing internally, mm-hmm. Right? And is there an external program out there? Maybe not to my kind of immediate recollection. But those are the metrics that are value add, in my opinion, to the organization. How long does it take for us to close this out? How many people were involved in this? How many payroll hours are associated to get this done? And if we can streamline the process, if we can tighten up how this is getting done, we can save billable hours, we can do this, we can do this. And also having conversations with the client that you're bidding for. So if the client is saying, hey, we want you to do 5, daily worksite inspections, okay, well, you're saying that's the supervisor, that's the worker, and that's the health and safety person. Those are 3 hours. It's going to cost us X amount of dollars to meet your compliance standards. Please sign on this dotted line that you understand that there's a cost for your request. Because the other conversation that I have with my clients is that the owner clients, the people, wanting to have these health and safety great programs on their project don't want to pay for it. So line item it. This is what it's going to cost to do your site site inspection frequency. That's over and above what our program is. This is what it's going to cost to do site orientation for your program. And then get them to say, yeah, we will or will not pay for this. That's a whole nother conversation that it very quickly lets you know what their perception of safety actually is. And gives you, I think, more legs to stand on in that conversation.
Yeah, well, I think there's probably beyond, let's say, the management buy-in around saying, let's not introduce programs that are unnecessary cost and complexity, but also, everybody talks about this kind of disengagement from the workforce and how do you increase engagement and how do you get people excited about these programs? And I would say, well, number one should be your programs should not be stupid. Like they should be very clearly delivering value and people should understand that this investment that they're making is leading to some further action and not simply, we need 600 observations this month because we do.
Somebody in a corporate office said 600 was the magic number.
Yeah.
Okay, but then you look at those 600 observations and sure, they're observations, but what is the value add? What is the decision? What is the behavior of the action that you are going to change based on those 600? If you're not diving into the analytics, and the question is like, I'm not a statistician, so for me as a health and safety practitioner to pull in all these stats and do data analytics, that's not me. I'm not a subject matter expert in collecting stats and interpreting stats. That would be somebody else that can help me do that. But at the same time, it's like, what is the value to the worker? And are you doing things that help them be successful in what they need to do for the day? Because if you're just layering on paperwork, if you're just getting them to do the things because your program says that it needs to be done, but there's no value to them, then again, they're either not going to do it quality wise, or there's going to be a lot of resistance to it. And sure, they'll do it because you're paying them to do it, but the why, the click in their psychology about why does this benefit me? How does this benefit me? What does this paper actually do to keep me safe? That is the next level conversation that you should be having with as part of your buy-in.
I'm literally writing down like product ideas as we discuss this. I'm having that.
Okay, perfect. Well, send me the contract for my percentage.
Yeah. Indeed. Okay, so
no, absolutely. Like, essentially, my saying, and again, this is why I was like, can I swear on your show? Is like, give a shit about your employees. Yeah. Give a shit about the people that work for you. Make decisions that go, how does this impact the people that I'm working with? Does this help them? Or is this just another widget to do? Is this another, product that you're offering? But like, how does this actually implement the decisions that you're making for them?
To go back, that's an interesting phrasing. And I think, do you think part of this comes from, again, maybe a changing in definitions of the problems that health and safety professionals are solving? Like, so to go back to that design thinking thing where it's all about, before let's talk about what we want to do, let's talk about the problem that we solve. And it's about changing that definition from the problem you're solving is we want a 95 on our compliance report. And instead it's about the problem that we're solving is we want to reduce risk in our workplace. One of the ways we measure that is through these compliance reports, but we have a broader strategy that, that defines how we're going to do that. And part of how we're going to do that is we're going to get people to be engaged and we're going to give a shit about their time.
Well, and also realize that like risk is a conversation that happens in multiple different facets of the organization. Is not just isolated to the health and safety department. There's financial risk, there's operational risk, there's strategic risk. And so are you even utilizing the same definition and concept of risk that as the rest of the organization? Because yeah, we're trying to reduce risk, but at certain tables, there's a certain amount of risk you have to take in order to get the thing that you want to achieve. Yeah. And so there's this balance of being risk averse, being risk accepting within your organization. And so if I'm talking risk and you're talking risk, again, are we talking the same risk?
Yeah. So many interesting, like just pontifications here around maybe that's something that management teams need to do a better job of defining. What level of risk is acceptable for us as an organization in an umbrella sense, as a way to give people more clarity on what should we optimizing for.
Sometimes I feel like health and safety practitioners, they're left out of that conversation because that conversation is happening. There's insurance conversations that are happening, right? There's a few health and safety professionals who specialize in risk in my network. And we've had a few of these kind of conversations. It's like that conversation is happening. They're deciding what is their cutoff, what is their threshold. We just might not be informed or invited to the table as we're having that discussion, as those decisions are being made. And if we are, and if we are not, I guess is the other way. How do you change your mindset to sit at that table, to provide value to that conversation? Because if you're not even invited to the table, is your feedback, is your contribution to the conversation even recognized in any way?
Yeah, well, I think that's it's a totally different example, but there's somebody who I follow in the marketing space, and one of his big taglines is like, you don't have time to work for a CEO who doesn't understand marketing. So I think in this case, completely different, but I think if you're a safety professional and you're not in those broader risk strategy meetings, what that either tells you is the organization doesn't understand your value and you need to figure that out, or they don't get it and you shouldn't work there.
Yeah, or they don't care.
Which again, you shouldn't work there. Like that.
Absolutely. And part of it is also, where are you in the org chart? And maybe for a smaller company within that 50 level, maybe your health and safety practitioner, you are sitting at those senior management conversations. For the 1,000 level employees, if you're even middle management safety, you're not at that table. You're, that director is. So again, maybe depending on where you are within the organization, where you want to go within the organization, thinking about your career development plan. In the next 5 years, I want to be a manager. I want to be a regional manager. I want to be a director of health and safety. You need to know more about health and safety, but you also need to know business. You need to understand the business acumen, and all of the facets of that to provide value to those operational conversations. Because right now, a lot of companies that I kind of engage with or have conversations with, it's okay, well, when you're making decisions, do you even think about health and safety as a conversation? Do you use the value of health and safety as part of your decision-making factors? I don't, what's the Last Week Tonight? Do you watch Last Week Tonight?
John Oliver, that's him.
Yeah, they had a really great program this Sunday about the trucking industry.
Okay.
And the hours of work and what is expected and how they pay. They're not employees, they're contracted operators. And it was the whole conversation was just underlying, rippling workplace health and safety issues. And so when you're sitting in an organization and they're not getting it, sometimes you need to ask yourself, well, maybe it's not them, maybe it's me. And I've been in those companies where I've gone and said, like, I'm not the health and safety person for you. I'm not getting my message across. I'm not the one to be a change agent for you. It's time for me to go. I've also had clients where I've said, like, you know what, we're not aligned. Let's just part ways, and I'll make some references if you want for some other people. But sometimes you need to know that not everybody is going to listen to you, and not everybody wants to listen to you. You have to find those right kind of avenues for you and for your messaging, which is why there are so many consultants, which is why there are so many health and safety practitioners that are out there. Everybody has their own different approach and different delivery methods. And so, yeah, they're not listening to you. It might not be your message. It just might be you. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because another company is going to grab you and embrace you and say, come on board, we are ready for what you have to say.
Yeah, well, I think, I think the ISO definition of risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And to a certain extent, another way to say, I think what you just said is that if you don't have authority on what the company's objectives are, and also what could lead to uncertainty in that company, and that could be for a plethora of reasons, regardless of why those reasons exist, you're going to have trouble speaking to risk and having an influence on that. So those are probably the places people want to focus.
Well, because health and safety profession, we think about risk as reduction of harm, reduction of injury, but that's one small sliver of risk. And having those different conversations is important. And again, it really cycles down to where you want to be within your career development. Because if you're a frontline health and safety practitioner and you're working next to the frontline supervisor, journeyman, foreman, like whatever, you're at that boots on the ground level, these strategic development planning conversations probably don't need to be in your toolkit. If you want to grow and expand and make strategic changes, then you should be kind of looking at how to develop your education outside of just the health and safety niche.
I know there was somebody who I spoke to on the show, and they were, head of EHS for some big companies. And one of the things that they do every time they start somewhere new is they mandate their whole team, regardless of level, to just understand the jargon of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that speaks to kind of what you're talking about here. And I was like, that is so sensible and actionable, and I feel like everybody should do it. Okay, I want to maybe pause this here before we dive into any of these other things, and I want to kind of round things out. I'm being conscious of the time here. I know you have a lot on your schedule, so I don't want to take too long. But yeah, I want to take a couple different directions, and I guess ask some not quite rapid fire questions, but like shorter hot take type of things. So I don't have a specific question written down, so I'm making this up on the fly. One of the things that I think is most influential for people to have impact, and I think all of us as health and safety professionals in whatever way we fall into that bucket, it's a role that I think is defined by impact, but where impact can be really difficult to measure. Hopefully, unless it's incident rates, and we want to avoid those. But I think impact for me comes from conviction, that you need to have conviction. You need to give a shit about the field in order to make an impact. So maybe I should have started here, but I'm just curious. Could you kind of articulate what you give a shit about in health and safety? Like where do your convictions lie? Just as a hot take, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but.
Yeah, I give a shit about giving people the right tools and resources to be successful in whatever they're doing. And to me, that kind of sums down to the right education and being empowered through their education, through their coaching, through their support system, and knowing that the company is there to support them as they grow and as they develop. So essentially, like, I care about people. That's kind of my give a shit, my passion. Like, what's not working for you? Let's figure out how to fix that through education, through giving you the right empowerment tools to do that, whether or not you need a high five every day, whether or not you need a little bit of a stronger tone and encouragement, and being very transparent, right? So being authentically transparent in how you communicate, why you communicate, what you're communicating, and realizing that every individual person is individual. And so your cookie cutter white brush approach to everything is probably not going to work. And you need to develop the policy, the plan, the procedure, whatever it is. Yes, it's a blanket term, a blanket policy, but how you make it impactful, how you direct it to those individuals and allow them to kind of steep in whatever you're trying to do, that's what I really care about.
So to dig into that maybe in a way that's more tangible for people, could you give any example of, if you were to go and work with a new company, like what's the number one thing that would drive you crazy when you start to learn the way that they run their systems?
Oh, there's so many things that drive me crazy when I'm starting.
You can give us bullet points. That's okay.
Yeah, to me, follow-up is a big thing. So walk the walk, talk the talk. And I know that that's like a generalized statement, but when it comes to health and safety, do the things that you say that you're going to do and do them in a timely manner. Communicate the things that you need to be communicating in a concise and clear way, so that it is not misconstrued or misinterpreted and therefore rippled out into various interpretations. And don't create work just to have work. Don't count widgets just to count widgets. To me, that's when I'm starting with a new company, I like to sit back, I watch, I listen, sit in different meetings, see how they're talking about their business, see if they talk about health and safety in operation meetings. If they don't, is there a nuance? Is there kind of like a conversation about journey management plan? Is there a conversation about whatever the widget is? So to me, one of the frustrating parts is that they have a great policy, but it's a binder that sits on the shelf. And that is frustrating to me. So my next level is like, what's not working in the program for them? And digging in further deeper into that, because I really dislike companies who say that they care about health and safety, but they're at that compliance level.
Yeah, and that kind of it's like a smoke screen. Like it all looks great on paper, but they're not no execution. I think I could see that being frustrating.
Like you walk onto the job site and you know within 10-15 minutes you're like, yeah, okay, this is how it really is. and sometimes you need to develop a little bit of trust with the different levels within the company to kind of really understand how it is. But you get the vibe right away, whether or not it's a paper program or it's actually a program that's implemented in a way that is meaningful.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me, we had James McPherson from RiskFluent in the UK on recently, and he was talking about doing, again, a site survey at a company where they had almost nothing on a documentation level, but it was one of the safest work sites he's ever been on. I hope I'm not misquoting. Could have been someone else, but I think it was James. And just that was something that was like perfectly executed on a values and leadership level, and they just didn't have the paperwork. And that's maybe a better situation to find yourself in.
And I get that a lot of times with the smaller companies that I work with. It's like, oh, we're doing this and we're doing this and we're doing this, and I'm seeing it, like I'm looking at it, and I'm like, why are you documenting it? Because unfortunately, that is part of the cycle, right? If you don't document it, how do you prove in a year that you actually were meeting and doing those requirements? So understanding that just because a company has a program, just because somebody has a certification, doesn't mean that they're a safe company.
Yeah. Okay. So lack of execution drives you crazy.
Yeah.
Understood. The last thing I want to ask here, and it's something that I'm personally really passionate about, but always curious to get additional perspectives, is there anything in particular in the broad profession of, occupational health and safety, or whatever you want to call it, that you think is the most ripe for disruption? What do you think is the next big thing that's going to change?
In the profession?
It could be tooling, it could be education, it could be
I'm going to answer it in twofold. There is a lot of conversation and a lot of movement, and it is, I think, progressing more rapidly in Alberta for having the profession regulated. So if somebody is going to call themselves a health and safety professional, it is regulated like a doctor, like a lawyer, like a regulated industry. Because right now, anybody can call themselves a health and safety practitioner. Mm-hmm. You can come with your GED, you can come with a PhD, you can come from all areas. There's nothing that says this is what health and safety practitioner needs to have in order to put that title behind them. So I think from a professional standpoint, that's going to be a disruptor, because there's going to be people who can or cannot meet that regulated standard. And it's going to disrupt, I think, how companies hire and how they perceive the value of that profession once that actually occurs. So that's kind of one, I think, facet.
Would you consider that a positive disruption or a negative disruption?
I think it's both. I think that it is positive because when you're going to see clients, they're struggling because there's not consistency in what a health and safety practitioner needs to have in order to call themselves a professional. And so that's where the different interpretations come from. That's where the auditor is providing, different viewpoints, because one person has a GED, and nothing against GEDs. What I'm saying is that one person has, one level of education, another has another. One person studied in this theory, another person studied in this theory, and there's no kind of benchmark, which is, part of maybe why the CRSP, as an example, is getting there, because a CRSP is kind of that generalist. You know enough to know enough, and you should know enough to know that you don't know everything. But when you see somebody with that professional designation, you know that they wrote an exam to get you to that level. Where if somebody else doesn't have that designation, you don't know what their background is to get them to that kind of level. So I think it is a positive and a negative, because it's going to change hiring structures. It's going to change how people view the industry. It's going to change how people grow in terms of their professional development, and maybe limit the opportunity for those field people to more easily get into a health and safety position if it becomes regulated. So a plus and a minus, I guess, from that. I think it's needed. That's my 2 cents on that conversation. What I really like to see happening in the health and safety world in terms of training and in terms of on-the-job training is augmented reality. I think that that's the next level. So you can do on-the-job training without putting people at harm, at risk, and you can develop those skill sets, and you can use technology in terms of drone and cameras to reduce the amount of either time or the likelihood of a person contacting that hazard utilizing technology. I think that that is going to be the next kind of disruptor of work, is unfortunately reducing the amount of human time in front of hazardous situations.
Okay.
And I don't know kind of where to go from that, but yeah, it's like, if you can use a robot or a drone, why would you put a person at risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think typically that's it's a reallocation of human resources into lower risk scenarios, because you still need to maintain the robots and do all that other stuff. But I think that's it. Do you think that that's going to be a near-term change or a long-term change? Because I know a lot of the issues there have been implementation related. Like, it sounds great in practice, but really tough to send a really expensive piece of technology into the field where it's going to break in 25 minutes.
I think it becomes, once that technology is more readily available on the market, you'll see it implemented more and more frequently. So as an example, like up in the oil sands, there are autonomous haul trucks now that are driving around without an operator behind the wheel. 20 years ago, that would never have happened, but we need to start thinking about the application of technology now, so that in 20 years from now, it's ready and available. Even just understanding the supply chain issues, right? So computer chips right now, good luck if you want to buy a computer in the next year or so, understanding the supply chain and the aspects. So even, I don't know, what was the cost of the original mobile phone? And nobody had mobile phones when they first started to come out. Now everybody has a mobile phone. And so as the technology becomes more cost effective for those smaller, medium to smaller businesses, I think that you'll see them lean more towards that as an option.
Interesting stuff. I think, again, that's like designed safety by design, just removing people from the hazard. So makes sense to me. Okay, I'm cognizant we're doing great on time here. I guess with that, is there anything as we wrap things up, any kind of plugs you want to give, anything else you want to get out there before we shut this down? Yeah,
so feel free to connect with me on transmitsafety.com. On transmitsafety.com, you'll find all of my socials, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, as well as jumping onto my newsletter where you can, see me on my own soapbox on a regular basis. And I'm also starting my own podcast as well. So my podcast will be available through transmitsafety.com.
Awesome. Okay, sweet. Well, it's been great to have you. I really enjoyed the conversation, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much for having me. I've enjoyed the hot seat questions that were unprepared and unplanned for. So hopefully everybody enjoyed our conversation who's listening.
I think you did a great job. All right. Well, thanks so much. And we'll get you on another one. All right. Well, thank you for making it all the way through the episode. I just wanted to mention again, this podcast is brought to you by Opslock. Opslock is the new way to keep your team safe at work. We're basically the most modern and advanced health and safety tool out there. If that sounds interesting to you, one of the things that we're offering to listeners of this podcast is free access to our workplace observations tool, meaning that you can roll out a digital workplace observations tool in your company, no matter what the size is, for free. If that sounds interesting or you just want to learn a little bit more, go to our website, opslock.com, fill out the Get a Demo form, let us know that you heard about us on the podcast, and someone, probably me, will set up a call with you. So anyway, that's it. Thanks a lot for listening through the episode, and I hope you have a great day.